Hello, this is your friendly neighborhood host, JT Wheatley here again, back for another episode of the History of Comics podcast. Once again, continuing with part 3 of the history of the war comic genre. When we last left off, we were knee-deep into the World War II era of the comic book genre, and ending with the invention of The Unknown Soldier by Joe Kubert and Robert Knaier, one of the classic World War II comic book heroes. And now we're going to start with another one. The DC war heroes, Sergeant Rock, who was also created by Robert Knaier and Joe Kubert. Rock wasn't the only soldier made into a comic book hero, as he was preceded by G.I. Joe in 1950 by Zeph Davis, and later joined by Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos in 1963 from Marvel, along with Captain Hurricane and Valiant No. 1 in October 1962. A prototype of Sergeant Rock first appeared in G.I. Combat No. 68 on January 1959, merely called The Rock at the time. He would later appear in Our Army at War No. 81 in April 1959, called Sergeant Rocky of Easy Company. The precise U.S. Army Infantry Regiment to which Rock's company is attached to is never identified, with writer Bob Haney and artists Ross Andrew and Mike Esposito, in the story The Rock of Easy Company, while Rock's co-creator Robert Knaier served as an editor of the comic. By issue number 82, in May of 1959, he was finally called Sergeant Rock before making his first full comic book appearance in issue number 83 on June of 1959 with the story The Rock and the Wall by his creators Robert Knaier and Joe Kubert, where the character finally took form. The character was a career soldier who served in the European theater during World War II, eventually rising to the ranks of sergeant to head Easy Company, which consisted of a ragtag of fellow soldiers such as the Gatling gun-wielding Bulldozer and Indian brave Little Sure Shot, among the hundreds of others. Reportedly, Rock's own dog tag number, 409966, was Knaier's own military serial number when he served. Kubert drew him to match his name, giving him a granite-faced, tough guy look, but when he took over the series as editor, he gave Rock's stories a strong anti-war theme, with each one ending with the phrase, "Make war no more." Soon, Sergeant Rock was so popular the comic was renamed after him with issue number 302 in 1977. Despite World War II lasting only 6 years, and even shorter for when the U.S. finally entered, Sergeant Rock has fought for nearly 50 years in the comic books. Reportedly, Robert Knaier intended to write the story of his death as his creative reason Rock couldn't exist once the war was over, but he never got a chance as he passed away in 2002. Despite both his creators' deaths, Kubert would die in 2012 and a series cancellation in 1988 with issue number 422, Sergeant Rock continues to appear in DC Comics to this day. In 2003, Sergeant Rock Between Hell and the Hard Place was written by Brian Azzarello and Joe Kubert, who also produced 2006 Sergeant Rock, The Prophecy. In 2008, Billy Tucci wrote and drew Sergeant Rock, The Last Battalion. Most recently, he was made part of Team 7 in the Flashpoint event of 2011. Sergeant Rock has even made sporadic appearances outside comics, notably in the Justice League episode The Savage Time, where he is voiced by actor Fred Dreyer. DC's chief competition, Marvel, would follow suit with Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos, which premiered on May 1963, created by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, and would last for 167 issues into December 1981. Reportedly, Kirby was inspired to do an adult version of his boy Commandos, while the name Howling Commandos came from Lee, who was inspired by the real-life Army unit, the Screaming Eagles. Lee also said that the series title was a bet he made with the Marvel's owner, Martin Goodman, who said that series with a title with a name so long couldn't be successful. Once again, since this series ran for 167 issues, Lee was proven right against Goodman. The Howling Commandos was notable for being a mixed unit, featuring a circus strongman, Dum Dum Dugan, a black soldier, Gabe Jones, especially considering the U.S. Army hadn't integrated during World War II, and even an Englishman. Of course, the name Commandos was problematic as well, since that was a term used for the British Army and not the Americans. Nevertheless, the series was a success, especially its leader, Nick Fury, a cigar-smoking career soldier who took on the likes of Baron von Strucker and his Blitzkrieg Squad. The unit even reunited for service during the Korean War, where Fury was promoted to lieutenant, and of course, Nick Fury would become the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., the foremost clandestine organization in the Marvel Universe, and also where he lost his eye and got his distinctive eye patch. Reportedly, this was a suggestion by Stan Lee, which Jack Kirby found ironic, as he was starting to lose his vision in his one eye but hadn't told anyone yet. The character lives in the Marvel Universe to this day, thanks to taking the Infinity Formula, which gives him extended life. While the character was originally white in the Marvel Comics and played by David Hasselhoff in the infamous 1998 Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV movie for Fox, he was been known now in the Marvel Cinematic Universe as being played by Samuel L. Jackson, whose look was the inspiration for the reimagining of the character in the Marvel Ultimate line. To explain this in the regular Marvel Comics, it's revealed that Nick Fury has an illegitimate black son, Nick Fury Jr., in the Battle Scars miniseries of 2012, who has since taken up the position of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well, along with partnering with agent Phil Coulson and the further incorporation of the MCU into the Marvel comic books line. It wasn't long before ripoffs started to follow, such as Sergeant Stryker's Death Squad in 1975 by Atlas, founded by Marvel's former owner Martin Goodman, appearing in all 3 issues of the comic, Savage Combat Tales. Consisting of 4 condemned army prisoners, an Asian judo expert, a circus acrobat, a giant pro wrestler, and a gangster, the series was written by Archie Goodman with art by Al McWilliams. Of course, with any genre, a bit of the weird would work its way into the stories, and the war comic genre was no exception. A very notable weird one from DC was The Haunted Tank, which was introduced in GI Combat number 87 in 1961, created by writer Robert Kanigher and artist Russ Heath, which was about the ghost of Jeb Stuart, the Confederate Civil War general, who guides his descendant, Lieutenant Jeb Stuart, and his light tank M3 Stuart tank crew during World War II. General Stuart, in turn, was sent by the ghost of Alexander the Great to guard both their namesakes, the soldier and the tank. Despite this crazy premise, the series lasted until issue number 288 in 1987, being DC's second longest war series after Sergeant Rock. The Iron Corporal first appeared in Army War Heroes in 1967 in issue number 22 by writer Willie Franz and artist Sam Glanzman, about a U.S. corporal whose rib cage is replaced with iron. Fighting in the Australian Army in the Pacific Theater, the series would only last for 4 issues, though. One of the classic weird stories in the war genre was The War That Time Forgot in the Star-Spangled War Stories number 90. Written by Robert Kanigher, it ran until issue number 137 about a group of soldiers trapped on Dinosaur Island during World War II. Weird War Tales number 93 in November 1980 introduced the Creature Commandos, created by J.M. DeMatteis and artist Pat Braddock, about monsters who fought during World War II. Led by a human, Lieutenant Matthew Shreve, and consisting of a vampire, a werewolf, and Medusa, along with a rebuilt Frankenstein monster. The series has made sporadic appearances in the DC ever since, and Shreve would appear in the season 3 of the CW series Arrow, played by actor Mark Singer. Another strange war tale was G.I. Robot, created by Robert Kanigher, Mike Exposito, and Ross Andrew in Star-Spangled War Stories number 101 on February-March of 1962 that would ultimately be about a series of 6 robots built for war. The first, Joe, served during World War II and even ended up on Dinosaur Island. Different versions of the character continued to appear throughout DC, with the most recent being Lord Job in the War That Time Forgot miniseries by Bruce Jones in 2008 to 2009. As for the comic that introduced many of these characters, Weird War Tales was produced by DC in 1971, running until 1983 for 124 issues. Designed as an anthology series to tell war stories with supernatural overtones, it was hosted by Def, who would wear different military uniforms to go with the story content. Featuring everything from robots, dinosaurs, Nazi apes, the series remains one of the more unique in the war comic book genre. Another weird war comic was in All Out War number 1 by Robert Kanigher and artist George Evans in 1979 about Voleric, the Viking commando, who was taken before his time by a Valkyrie and sent to post-D-Day Earth by Odin, where he would fight the modern-day equivalent of the Huns, which are, of course, the Nazi Germans. However, the series would only last for 6 issues. Also of note, Huns were a misnomer that was used against the Germans, though technically speaking, the Huns were actually from the Far East, not the German countries. Today, writer Garth Ennis is probably best known as the writer of The Preacher, but he was also an ardent war comic book fan as a child and nearly revived the entire genre by himself in the early 2000s. One of his comic books was War Stories, which was published by Vertigo, the DC comic book imprint, as 8 64-page one-shot issues from 2001 to 2003, telling various tales of service during World War II. Of these stories, some were Condors, about the Spanish Civil War and illustrated by Carlos Escobar. It was about 4 men from different countries all fighting from different sides of the war, only to find themselves trapped in a bomb crater together. Johann's Tiger was about a German tank crew retreating from the Russian front, with art by Chris Weston and Gary Erickson. Archangel, with art by Erickson again, told the preposterous but true story about how ship convoys were protected with fighter planes that were launched from the decks, but with no way to land back on them. D-Day Jodders, with art by John Higgins, was about an Italian campaign about how those serving were overlooked after D-Day was launched. The Reavers, with the art by Cam Kennedy, was about the future SAS as they formed during the Desert Campaign in World War II. Screaming Eagles, with art by Dave Givens, took place in the German castle where soldiers had a few days of relaxation. Nightingale and J. Fortuny were by artist David Lloyd and arguably the darkest stories of the series. The first was about claustrophobic confines of a convoy ship heading to the Russian front, while the latter was about the controversial blanket bombing by the Allies of the German industrial region. Adventures of the Rifle Brigade in 2000 was a 3-part miniseries published by Vertigo as a nod to the Dirty Dozen, from writer Garth Ennis and artist Carlos Escudero, as a group of incompetent troops are parachuted into Berlin. Its sequel, Operation Bollock, in 2001, was another 3-part miniseries about a propaganda mission to capture, of all things, Hitler's missing testicle. And it's always had a knack for the twisted humor. Battler's Britain, in 2006, this time published by DC's Wildstar imprint, was also by writer Garth Ennis, was about fighter pilots during the Desert Campaign, based on the original IPC character. While 303 in 2004 was a 6-part miniseries published by Avatar, with art by Jason Bearers, about a war-ravaged Afghanistan. Battlefields from Dynamite is a 3-issue miniseries about further stories in World War II. And of course, all those previously mentioned were also by writer Garth Ennis. As mentioned, the man loves his war comics. Of course, the plight of the black soldiers during World War II wasn't much better than from World War I, and it was not ignored by comic books, which made for right contrast in the war that was fought for freedom while the U.S. forces were still segregated. Comic books originally ignored this in the genre, but would eventually start to address it. Our Army at War number 83 introduced Jackie Johnson in 1959, serving as part of Sergeant Rock's Easy Company, despite the fact that U.S. soldiers were still segregated at the time. Marvel did the same with Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos number 1 in May 1963, with Gabe Jones as a black soldier being part of the unit. Like his leader, Nick Fury, Jones would have a long career after World War II, serving with him during both Korea and Vietnam while joining S.H.I.E.L.D. In many ways, this was the comic book companies reacting to the growing civil rights movement of the 1960s, ignoring real history in the process. A more accurate depiction of the plight of black soldiers during World War II was DC Comics' Man of War number 1 in 1977, which introduced Gravedigger Ulysses Hazard, a black volunteer who was originally assigned to gravedigging duty, but manages to win over the Army brass thanks to his fierce fighting ability. Soon, the Gravedigger takes on a new meaning, as he's essentially a one-man commando unit sent to put Nazis in their graves. It is later revealed in DC Universe Legacies number 4 in the story Snapshot Remembrance that Hazard made a career in the Army, rising to the rates of colonel, eventually having a reunion with fellow DC war heroes, from Jeb Stewart of the Haunted Tank to the Unknown Soldier, on July 4th, 1976. The Gravedigger's legacy lives on in D.C. as his grandson, Perseus Hazard, is part of Squad K, a government unit tasked with taking down Superman if he ever went rogue. While the Gravedigger name was taken up by Tyson Skites, a black checkmate operative with the designate Rook Alpha, with special telepathic powers from a formula he injects. While these stories showed that the Allies weren't as clean as compared to the Axis powers, they were in no way as bad either, as legendary boxer Joe Louis commented when he enlisted in the Army during World War II. When asked how he could support the Allies when America would still practice segregation, Louis replied, "America has problems, but Hitler isn't going to solve them." As the next comic book series will illustrate, the heavyweight great knew what he was talking about. Probably the most horrific event in human history remains the Holocaust, when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime set out to exterminate the Jewish race. Considering that many comic creators from early on and even today are Jewish, they would no doubt use their medium to address this monstrosity. One powerful story that addressed the Holocaust was The Master Race by writer Alfred Steen and artist Bernard Brixton, appearing in the launch issue of EC's Impact in 1955. A 6-part story about a concentration camp guard haunted by one of his former charges is a masterpiece addressing the horrors of the Holocaust. The most notable comic books to do so with the Holocaust, though, was Mouse by Art Spiegelman, in which the Spiegelman recounts his father surviving the Holocaust, depicting the Jews as mice and the Nazis as cats. The stories first appeared in Apex Novelties' Funny Animals in 1972, and would be reprinted in Marvel's Kitchen Sink's The Comics Books number 2, though more mainstream appeal. Finally, Spiegelman interviewed his father more extensively to produce a larger story, which was serialized in the Raw magazine, first appearing in issue number 2 in December 1980, and continuing throughout the decade, with only the last chapter not appearing in the Raw magazine as it was ended in 1991. Spiegelman eventually collected the first 3 chapters in the book, Mouse, A Survivor's Tale, subtitled My Father Bleeds History, by Pantheon Books in August 1986, the same year that The Dark Knight Returns and The Watchmen were also released, one of the reasons many consider 1986 to be the greatest year in comic book history. Reportedly, to avoid comparisons to the upcoming Don Bluth animated film An American Tale, which also used mice to represent Jews, but this time as immigrants in the 1800s. Pantheon would later collect the last 5 chapters in 1991 for the second volume, subtitled And Here My Troubles Begin. Mouse remains one of the most acclaimed comic books to this day. In 1992, it became the first to receive a Pulitzer Prize, with a special award in letters, and is still one of the most powerful testaments of the Holocaust. Marvel will incorporate the Holocaust into a larger universe when he retroactively made Magneto, the chief villain of the X-Men, Jewish and survivor of Auschwitz, the infamous Nazi concentration camp. Writer Mark Millar demonstrates this motivated Magneto's current stance against humans in Wolverine number 32 in Volume 3 in 2005, while also noting the brutal irony that Magneto, in believing that mutants are like himself are superior to humans, has essentially become like the Nazis he so hated. A classic villain arc in which the villain becomes the thing he hates the most. We Are on Our Own by Miriam Katine dealt with the persecution of her Jewish mother in the Nazi-occupied Budapest in 1944, detailing how she survived and thus ensuring that Miriam's own survival. The plot, The Secret Protocols of the Elders of Zion by Walt Eisner, addressed the long-term anti-Semitic propaganda. Judenhaus by Dave Sim, most notably the creator of the Cerebus, detailed anti-Semitic quotes made by historical figures while contrasting them with the imagery from the Holocaust. Der ist Frühling, The First Spring, by artist Christoph Hera, which was an adaptation of Klaus Carden's novel, was about a Buchenwald survivor in East Germany who recorded interviews when he is arrested by the Stasi. The Achten King, A Family Secret by Dutch creator Eric Hovel, dealt with the wartime persecution of Jews as part of a wider picture, which he followed up with The Search in 2008. Both books were published by Anne Frank House. The Marines has always been a specialized branch in the U.S. Armed Forces, as such has had numerous books detailing them. One of the first books to feature them was The Leatherneck the Marine in 1943 by Samuel E. Lall and Company, along with the U.S. Marines by Magazine Enterprises, which produced 4 issues that same year. Magazine Enterprises would revive the series in 1952 in their 4-issue run, this time in coordination with the Korean War. Monty Hall and the U.S. Marines from Toby premiered the previous year and lasted for 11 issues, about Hall and his sidekicks, Tex and Canarsie, adventures on and off the battlefield during World War II. Toby would have him later appear in With the Marines in the Battlefront of the World, a 2-issue series launched in 1953, with the first issue featuring a 10-page story with the movie star John Wayne. Hall, Tex, and Canarsie would then appear in Tell It to the Marines number 8 in 1954, a series Toby premiered 2 years earlier and would last for 15 issues in total, and would be one of the many war comic books created during the Korean War. Other comics created in reaction to Korea featuring the Marines were The Fighting Marines, originally published by St. John before Charlton took it over for 163 issues until 1984, along with Toby's U.S. Marines in Action and The Fighting Leathernecks, which ran alongside the company's Tell It to the Marines. Charlton also did 9 issues of Marines Attack and 18 issues of Tell It to the Marines in 1964. Atlas, The Future Marvel, did Marines in Battle and Marines in Action in 1954 and 1955 respectively. In 1980, Semper Fi was launched off the success of Marvel's comic The Nam, but only lasted for 9 issues. The Navy, of course, would be featured in a number of comic books, which appeared in more than a few titles as well. Army and Navy Comics 1941 was published by Street and Smith, though that was more of a humor series. Don Winslow, USN, by Bell Syndicate, was published in 1945, having first been released as a comic strip on March 5, 1934, originally designed as a recruitment tool for the Navy. Created by Leon Burroff and Carl Hammond, it detailed the adventures of Lieutenant Commander Don Winslow of the U.S. Naval Intelligence. In 1943, Fawcett picked up the license to produce Don Winslow and the Navy, complete with Captain Marvel appearing on the cover. The series ran for 69 issues until 1954. Charlton would acquire it for another 4 issues before turning into Fighting Navy with issue number 74. It would then run for another 52 issues until 1966, along with a 1983 revival that would bring the series total to 133 issues. Other Navy comic books by Charlton was War at Sea in 1957, Navy War Heroes in 1964, and Attack at Sea in 1968. Key publications launched Navy Task Force and Navy Patrol in 1954 and 55, respectively, while Stanmore Publications produced the one-shot Navy Combat in 1955. Atlas produced Navy Tales in 1957, along with Navy Action 1954, which ran for 18 issues and was most noted for its tongue-in-cheek Sailor Sweeney stories, which appeared in 3 of them. A unique comic book was Navy History and Tradition in 1958, which gave a history lesson about the Navy over 7 issues. Sad Sack Navy, Gob, and Gals in 1972 was released by Harvey, a humor title that only lasted for 8 issues. Since many comic book creators served in the military, more than a few would document their experiences in comic books. Our Fighting Forces sensationalized Jack Kirby's own experience serving in World War II in the European theater. However, probably the most notable autographical comic book accounts of service in the military was USS Stevens by Sam Glasman. Originally appearing in DC's Our Army at War and War Diary, it was based on the actual letters Glasman sent home while serving in the 1940s in the destroyer USS Stevens. It will eventually be collected at Marvel in a 2-volume set, A Sailor's Story in 1987 and 1989. The first volume followed Glasman enlisting in the Navy after Pearl Harbor and followed through his discharge in 1946 and his return home. For the second volume, Winds, Dreams, and Dragons, the artist obtained his battleship's old wartime logs along with a meeting an old shipmate which prompted him when promoting the first book. Book volumes detailed the highs and lows of Navy service, from the cramped conditions, joys of shore leave, and horrors of combat. Glasman even incorporated cartoons produced by his shipmates during their service, giving the books a scrapbook feel. The series remains one of the best autobiographies of anyone who served, though Glasman has stated he has been stereotyped as a war comic book artist, stating in 1998, "I could draw something besides war." One aspect of Navy stories that has been hard for comic books to adapt has been the submarine combat, as the submerged combat is hard to reproduce in illustrated form. That wasn't to say that the comic books didn't give it a try. Submarine Attack by Charlton in 1958 lasted for 8 years, picking up its numbering from Speed Demons with issue number 11 and ran to issue number 54. It featured numerous stories of submarine combat along with the art contributed by the previous mentioned Sam Glasman. Fighting Undersea Commandos by Avon in 1952 showcased the exploits of Navy Frogman, but only lasted for 5 issues. Frogman Comics did the same at Hillman, though it is considered more of an adventure book over being a war comic. Truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, even in war, but sometimes fiction can be prophetic with its imaginations, as demonstrated with National Comics number 18 by Quality, which predicted the Pearl Harbor attack on November of 1941, though it featured Uncle Sam fighting a German attack on the Hawaiian island. After Pearl Harbor, half the focus of World War II in America naturally went to the Pacific and fighting the Japanese. By Captain America Adventures number 13, he was fighting the Japanese in April 1942 with him yelling, "You started it, now we'll finish it." There was also Remember Pearl Harbor one-shot by Street and Smith, published 1 year after the attack. For the 60th anniversary, Pearl Harbor, the comic book in 1941 by Ted Noreen, was published by Antarctic Press in 2001. Attack on Pearl Harbor, Day of Infinity was published in 2007 by writers Steve White and artist Gary Erskine and Jared Spahn. With the Pacific War in full effect, more comic heroes would follow. Captain Savage, after serving with Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos, would transfer to the Pacific Theater with his own title in January 1986, Captain Savage and his Leatherneck Raiders, where he led Yakety Yates, Frenchie Lolorac, Blarney Stone, and Jay Littlebear. Those are some comic book names I've ever heard of them. But the series would only run for 19 issues. Further examples of the Pacific War becoming a subject in the comic books was The Losers, who first appeared in DC's GI Comic number 138 in 1969, created by Robert Kanigher, before moving to the Our Fighting Forces with issue number 123 in 1970, which featured a mix of servicemen who had lost their original units, led by Captain Storm, who had a wooden leg. His team also included Gunner and Sarge, respectively the oldest and youngest Marines still in the service, and Johnny Cloud, a pilot also known as the Navajo Ace. Created as anti-heroes, highlighting the negative aspects of war in light of the Vietnam at the time, they have made sporadic appearances in DC ever since, and most notably in the classic DC The New Frontier by Darwin Cook, where they end up on Dinosaur Island. In 2004, a new miniseries under the same name was created by writer Andy Diggle and artist Jock about a special forces team who go to war against the CIA after a handler tries to kill them. It was originally meant to be a continuation of the original series, with the old heroes pulling a caper in the 1950s. This miniseries was eventually adapted into the 2010 comic book movie. USA Comics had Jap Buster Johnson, a name sadly fitting for the times, in issue number 6 of 1942. In keeping with his bigoted name, Johnson would have featured stories of him rooting out Japanese sympathizers in the Navy, including identified as a disguised Japanese infiltrator by his inability to say lollipops. While offensive, Johnson did capture the mood at the time, particularly after Pearl Harbor, and thus the series continued for 4 years in USA Comics. Barefoot Gen, Hadoshi no Gen, by Kiji Nakazawa, was about Hiroshima survivor, being released in June of 1973. Nakazawa himself was a Hiroshima survivor, and despite experiencing the horrors firsthand, still managed to mix in some moments of humor, realizing for audiences will have a hard time otherwise. The lead character, Gen, based on Nakazawa himself, manages to mix in optimism despite losing his family and his hair falling out. As Gen reasons, it'll grow back. Horrors still abound, from victims' skin peeling off to gangsters exploiting the event for a turf war. Barefoot first appears in Shueisha's Shuken Shonen Jumpu, Weekly Shonen Jump, on June 1973 before moving to different magazines, eventually spawning 10 volumes. It was even adapted into a 3-part live-action film from 1976 to 1980. And of course, it would later be an anime in 1983. Later, Barefoot even made its way to TV in 2007 and even an opera. The manga was preceded by I Saw It by Orawa Mita in 1972, detailing how his mother's bones became so weakened by the radiation they didn't survive cremation. Project Gen was formed as a volunteer organization in response to comic to spread Nakazawa's work in hopes that such an event will never happen again. Britain had several comic book strips about war, and like in America, many strips preceded World War II itself. In 1938, Jester's comical detectives Basil and Burt fight against the evil dictator, being nothing more than a thinly disguised attack on the events in Europe. When war is declared, Tater, his spy, Herpin, and the soldiers, the Storm Taters, show their true selves. Eightful Adolf, German General Snoring, and Dr. Goebbels suffered a weekly kick in the pants or a dunk in the pond by the strip's heroes. It was humor like this that helped the British deal with the dark days of the war, as other strips like Addie and Hermie, the Nazis and Dandy, and Musso the Wop, he's a big little flop, and The Beano by D.C. Thompson. D.C. Thompson continued with other weekly releases, whether it be Lord Snooty and his pounds drowning a German plane with a kite, Pansy Potter attacking a U-boat with a can opener, or Desperate Dan punching Hitler all the way back to Europe. The humor went both ways as well, as Colonel Blimp by David Lowe presented British officers as plump, walrus mustache has-beens refusing to change with the times. Lowe received both criticism and praise for his work, mostly from those that resembled his Colonel Blimp character. Another strip of a different kind was Jane, appearing in the Daily Miller, a bombshell former flapper who helps her friends build an air raid shelter while, in a boost to troops' morale, will appear completely nude in the strip as a way of giving her all for the boys. War Heroes also took a larger presence in British strips, with Rover's Master Spy about Tiger Wallace, who was charged with infiltrating the German High Command, which was published by D.C. Thompson in May 1939. Champion by Amigated Press saw Air Ace Rocket Fist Rogan trading his World War I biplane for a sleek Spitfire with the slogan, "Same enemy, different aircraft." Even post-war strips continued to work, such as Fleetway's The Lone Commandos appearing in Lion in 1952 about a mission to destroy a German radar station in occupied France. From all this, a new comic book format would arise in Britain with the Pocket Picture Library. It came about in 1950 when Edward Holmes had the idea to reuse artwork from a series of new comics, but only printing press available was the line previously used for publishers' pocket romance and crime lines. The new format was a hit, especially with schoolboys who could slip the 64-page books in their coat pockets. The war genre especially benefited from the new format, with 10,000 pocket libraries published from 1960 to 1992. A notable one was Thrilling Picture Library that featured Battler Britland, Spy 13, and RFC Ace Dogfight Dixon. Fleetway launched War Picture Library in September 1958, with many other picture libraries to follow, such as Combat Picture Library in 1959, Battle Action Pictures in 1959, Air Ace Picture Library in 1960, Picture War Stories of World War II in 1960, Battle Picture Library in 1961, Air War Picture Stories in 1961, Commando in 1961, War at Sea Picture Library in 1962, Sea War Picture Library in 1962 as well, and Attack War Picture Stories in 1962. Of these, War Picture Library ran for 2,103 issues, Combat Picture Library for 1,212 issues, and Battle Picture Library for 1,706 issues. Commando continues to this day, having published its 4,000th issue in April 2007. The books featured numerous stories, notably Battler Britain, Jeff Curtis, and Maddox Marauders. One of the most popular war titles from Britain was Warlord, a weekly anthology series that premiered in September 1974 and ran to September 1986 for 627 issues by D.C. Thompson. Described as an all-action, all-picture war story, one of its main features was Codename Warlord, about Lord Peter Flint, about a British spy during World War II. The character became so popular he commandeered the series' letter page, calling all warlord agents, where he communicated directly with the readers. Another main hero was introduced on September 1984, Union Jack Jackson, a British Royal Marine who was the sole survivor of a Japanese attack on the Trans-Pacific troop ship, who joins the U.S. Marine outfit until he can be reunited with his own countrymen. Jackson would fight alongside his American compatriots, Private Sean O'Banion and Sergeant Lonigan, fighting the Japanese in the island-hopping campaign before moving to Europe, where he fought the Nazis while still trying to reunite with the British. Other stories featured in Warlord was Killer Kane about an RAF pilot, Drake of E-Boat Alley about a Royal Navy captain, The Tankies about British Army crew, and Sniper Kelly starring the eponymous British infantryman. The magazine would feature American war stories as well, such as The Rakers about Sergeant Raker and Cassie about Marine Corps pilot. Even the Germans got a turn with Iron Annie about Luftwaffe pilot Kurt Stallman and Cropland Falcons about a disgraced soldier Hans Falcon. As Warlord aged in the 1980s, it tried more futuristic stories like the Holocaust Squadron set in World War III and Saber's Army. Eventually, the magazine would merge with the editor magazine The Victor, which continued many of the more popular features, such as Codename Warlord and Union Jack Jackson. And we will leave off for that for today. Believe it or not, yes, we are still in World War II, but we'll continue with more British comic books of the era, and we'll finally move on to further war stories. Like I said, World War II really did influence comic books and many stories to this day, and this is going to be these episodes as well.
Great things are coming on the Nerd Bliss podcast. We're changing up our presentation while keeping the candidness that you enjoy. We'll cover all your favorite shows and movies, with maybe a few surprises along the way. And you, yes you, will have opportunities to be on our show on a regular basis. That's right, we've got the Zoom Pro account, and we're going to use it. So be ready. Find us at nerdblisspodcast.com and esonetwork.com, and on all the socials at NerdBlissPod. Nerd Bliss. Listen up.
And now it is May 29th, 2025, time for the favorite comic of the week. Ultimate Spider-Man number 17 by Jonathan Hickman and David Messina, which is another great issue that focuses on Harry Osborn and Gwen Stacy, the retrospective Green Goblin and Mysterios of this universe, as they continue to make moves behind the scenes after faking Harry's death, along with finally calling Spider-Man back into action. This is just another great issue that, yes, there's not a lot of Spider-Man in this, but it does focus on building the larger world and thus making it a more interesting place for Spider-Man to be in. And also, Hickman does a great job adding a more few twists and turns about how Gwen Stacy's this universe is Mysterio. And also, Harry has an interesting interaction with the AI version of his dad that kind of hints at his darker turn. And it's masked by Messina's art, which not as dynamic as Marco Giacchetto's art, but extends into a more personal story with a lot of talking. Perfect for that because he has fantastic facial expressions and conversations, which is, like I said, perfect for this story. So yeah, continually, all that plus that cliffhanger where Spidey's finally coming back, and this remains the best Spider-Man book in the stands. And with that, we will conclude with this edition of the Archives. Join me next week for part 4 of the History of War comics. And until then, go ahead and enjoy the good comic book. And of course, check out Ultimate Spider-Man at this point. Come on, it's the best Spider-Man book we've had in over a year.